I ever been a fireman, but I once spent the entire night all alone in a firehouse somewhere in the middle of Kentucky. I was riding my bicycle across the United States, and I'd heard about this firehouse where if you were doing such a thing, you could stay there for free, and all they asked was that you left the place exactly the way you found it. To get there, though, I had to pedal 94 miles in the pouring rain. Now, riding a bike in the rain is basically much more of a mental thing than a physical thing. After a few minutes, you just can't get any wetter, and it really doesn't matter anymore, and you start thinking about other things to take your mind off the dismal weather. And I felt like I really needed to focus on anything that would keep my mind off of it. I thought about the fact that I was going to cross 1,000 miles that day. I thought about the fact that I was going to ride into another time zone that day. And these were all uplifting things. But there was something else that was really nice about riding in the rain, where you would actually hear the differences of the sound of the rain hitting the trees, depending on how heavy the downfall was. And when it was very heavy and when it let up, it was a certain kind of cadence. It was kind of became the background music track to my ride. But there was something much more important that happened later when I stopped around 9 o'clock at a little convenience store. Something much more powerful that I learned that is more important than just having the physical stamina to ride your bike across the country. And in that little convenience store, sitting off in the corner, were 4 farmers. And I'm standing there totally soaking wet with water squishing out of my shoes. And one of them motions me up to come over and sit down and join them. And I'm looking at it and I'm going, what? I'm going, what in God's name am I going to have in common with these farmers? I'm a city boy. And why in the world would they invite this saturated mess over to their table? But I sat down, and after about 5 minutes, it was like we knew each other our whole lives. And what was really cool for me was the fact that since I've been riding 1,000 miles basically alongside farmland, I had a lot of questions. And they had all the expert answers for me. It was great. They cracked up, though, when I told them that until then, I didn't realize that there were 2 different types of cattle. I assumed it was just one breed. I didn't know it was dairy and beef. So I assumed that the females were where we got the milk, and the males were all killed off for hamburgers. That's how naive and how city boy I was. Really, I just never thought of that. But when I was ready to leave, I asked, as I always did, I asked the locals, I said, are there any big hills coming up? And this one guy, Carl, who was a dead ringer for the Marlboro Man, said to me, oh, you're facing a pretty steep one up at about 10 miles up near the Influence. I said, the Influence? He goes, yeah, you know, the Influence, where 2 rivers come together. And I go, oh, you mean the confluence. Well, his face turned to stone, and he just stared at me for the longest time. And then took a drag on a cigarette, and the most condescending smile curled up on his face. But he didn't utter a word, but he said everything with just his eyes. Yeah, whatever, smart ass. He was right about the ass, and it definitely wasn't smart of me to correct him. But I thought about, like, geez, I just sat here for an hour and a half. They told me all this fascinating shit about farming. I was like, this is great. And what do I give them? A fucking vocabulary lesson. So I pedal along back in the rain, and and in my head, it's like these faces are still like right in front of me, and they're replaying like I'm watching it on a DVR. And I started thinking, Carl was right, there is an influence here. It's the influence of people and conversations. And it made me feel like a disembodied head just sort of gliding up that steep hill without any effort. And that night, in the firehouse, upstairs in the loft, on a cot, snuggling under a nice wool blanket, nice and warm and blissfully dry, I thought back on the day, and I said, you know, this is the best day of my ride so far. Because it was the people that were propelling me along. And it also made me remember a couple where I had lunch. I stopped at a cafe, and I grabbed my little tray of food, and I was looking for the most remote corner to park myself so I could impose like a self-quarantine of my stinky, stanky, soggy self, keeping them away from the rest of humanity. When this nice couple said, why don't you join us? They didn't care about how grungy I was. All they wanted was some conversation and the transaction of little bits and pieces of our lives. And I thought about the day before on my ride, how it had been glorious sunshine and spectacular scenery, silk degrees, but no people time. And this day was filled with the most dreadful weather and an abundance of people time. And if I had to pick which of the two was the more glorious, it was that day. Because only people can make it feel like the sun is shining when you're riding your bike 94 miles in the pouring rain.